Welcome. This is the fifth part of the first century Christian leaders. I'm going to begin with the disciples of John. We trace John from his days of a disciple of John to the leader in Syria to ending up in Ephesus, where Paul had set up a missionary, a church, a Christian church among the Jews in his second missionary journey and spent time there in his third. So when we get to John, he serves in Ephesus till probably around 100 CE, and he's the last living apostle. We're going to look at his disciples. We're going to look at some of the people who claim to have worked with him. We're going to look at the fact that St. Luke probably interacted with him. Timothy interacted because he was sent to be in Ephesus and then co-led with John. John would have been respected as the disciple of Christ. He interacted with Ignatius of Antioch as one of the leaders of key large Christian churches. He met Polycarp early and probably trained him. Irenaeus then was trained by Polycarp, and he probably influenced the leaders such as Justin Martyr, people who taught Justin Martyr. So you see, we lost a number of our leaders in 84 CE for Luke, 65 and 66 CE for Peter and Paul. You lose Clement, who's preaching after Paul in 99 CE, again, all martyrdoms, and Polycarp is martyred after John dies. So this is a living thing. We are looking at how these transitions worked. Again, remember that Ephesus was set up in 53 AD in the second, probably around that time in if Paul's first journey to Philippi was in 51 AD. It could be later, switching everything by year, but let's start with that. Let's look at his compatriots and those who came after us. He would have been interacting with Barnabas, who would have been in Jerusalem and Antioch and sent along the first missionary journey with Paul. He would have been interacting with Luke. Perhaps he met him in Antioch and he traveled with him, as you find in Acts and in Corinthians and 2 Timothy and Philemon. He was probably knew the compiler of the Didache. As a Syrian leader, he would have been something they would have consulted. And the Jewish-Christian split had not deepened when the Didache is written. So you see that's really close to John's Jewish leadership in Syria. He would have known Ignatius, who would have been in Antioch. He probably, as a Syrian leader, would have talked to him. He would have also talked to him after he moved to Ephesus. So he's going to be familiar with these writers. John is sort of the touchstone. Timothy was appointed bishop by Paul and before John gets there, but he dies in the Domitian, which is one of the Roman emperor's persecutions according to the apostolic constitutions. In 30 to 90 AD, he would have interacted with Titus, who was in Crete and Dalmatia, but Paul sent him, and Titus probably interacted with Timothy and the other leaders who might have visited, such as Clement. Polycarp was a bishop of Smyrna, but prior to this, he probably was a disciple of John, and he wrote these various early Christian literatures. Ignatius to Polycarp would have been one of the letters he received, but Polycarp wrote to the Philippians, and there's a description of the martyrdom of Polycarp, which is the inspiration you probably read. Now, you get the Hermes in Rome. You don't know who the shepherd of Hermes is. Was it a pseudonym of another person like Clement? Was it Clement? In 830 AD, the first bishop after Peter was Linus, and he knew the apostles and probably John, and Irenaeus was also in that time. So that's what that comes from Abesius. The shepherd of Hermes I forgot to mention, also comes from Irenaeus in Audratus Heresies, if I pronounced that right, but it's the against heretics is the English translation. And he was interacting with Clement of Rome, who also traveled with Paul and wrote to the Corinthians, who continued to be troublesome, which John probably. So who else did he interact in the third generation? Well, there's Irenaeus, who was bishop for Lyons after he was in Rome. That's because all the people in Lyons were massacred by closing the church door and burning them to death. He was also probably familiar with Hippolytus of Rome, who wrote on apostolic traditions, which is, he was a presbyter trying to teach others. So these are two people who wrote to keep alive the faith. Now, beyond that, you have the third generation apologist, Audratus, who lived in Athens from 120 to 130 CE, and he apologized to Hadrian. He was trying to get acceptance of the Christian religion. You have Aristides, who was also in Athens and made the same apology, and he wrote the Quadratus' Apology for Christian Religion, the Aristides' Apology to Philosophus Critias, which is the Latin, and Diogentus, which is in Rome or Greek or Asia Minor, and he wrote the Epistle to Diogentus. So, and that's really, Justin Martyr was an apology to Titus, the Roman cylinder, and he also tried to provide uh, um, an apology to the Roman emperors. Unfortunately, Justin Martyr was martyred for his stance as a philosopher and a Christian. Irenaeus died in, ran from 130 to 200. He was after John, but interacted with Polycarp, and Hippolytus has some of the same things. You see that third generation begins to try to get Rome to stop killing it. There is also in John's lifetime the heresies that started, that I will go through, that I've gone through in the second week, or I will have gone to in the second week, that talked about the Samaritan heresies. These Samaritan heresies you find in Acts 8, 9 through 25, where Simon the magician is one of the heretics. From him comes Celebus, Dositheus, Gortatius, Masabotus, and Theobutus. This is from the various apostolic constitutions and Eusebius. Then you have all of the things that come after it that flourish from 90 CE to 160 and beyond. And you see John in the middle of it. He's got Marcissus the magician, Meander, Cerdon, Carpetus, Valenius. None of these heresies are unique, and so Irenaeus carefully delineates them. You see from Aristides, you have Belicidas, Saturnus, Marcion of Pontius, and you talk about that the Father of Christ is not the Creator God. You have Syrians and Nicolaitans that give freedom for sexual license, and you notice that in First John and many of the writings you'll find that. You find other things that say the angels will reign for 1,000 years on earth and there'll be human bodies. You find also the Arabinite heresy that says Jesus is just a good man. You see over zealous celibacy, vegetarian, and all of these are in in John's first generation as the end, in the second generation, and in the third generation going into the third. So these leaders had to fight this heresy of Gnosticism. I hope the Gnosticism presentation will help you with that. Well, that's the end of the timeline for the first century Christian leaders. I hope this has been helpful in setting up yours.